From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Howdy.
If you got a tip from Melissa, an interesting tidbit on a case you think you can solve, a rumor, of a hint, of a clue that might break open an unsolved disappearance, how to stop the vaping fad, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. Or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, bringing in 2019 with a bang, the one she got from the home ballistics kit she got for Christmas, Melissa Morgan.
More Bella the cow. I'm not sure why you're lying about my home ballistics kit.
Why am I lying?
I did not receive that.
Oh, maybe it's still under the tree.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it's the last thing. Maybe it's like, you know, the BB gun in A Christmas Story.
Yes.
It's the last thing sitting there.
Both involving guns.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, no, that's your problem. You got a problem.
It's your Red Ryder ballistics kit.
Right. Oh, my God. At Fisher Price?
Yeah,
my Fisher Price. My play school ballistics kit?
Right.
That's awesome.
Comes with a 38 special. And,
oh, my. They're just little. They're a little gun.
They're little tiny
little
ones.
baby 22 gun. I did receive a 23andMe DNA kit from Santa, and I'm very excited to find out the number of serial killers that are in my family.
Oh, right.
And to find out that I am black.
Okay.
I am tired of being boring white.
I just have to say, you're pretty white.
I could pass, but I know that this is going to be interesting when we get the results back.
Although I have seen that picture you have of your grandfather. Very handsome gentleman.
That's the one that if people are like, huh.
Yeah. He was, he looks a little, you know, there's some pigmentation.
Yeah, he's got melanin in his skin.
Melanin, that's it.
So the thing is, he tanned very, very easily in the summer. And I was dating a brown person and another couple, one of them who was brown, was at my home for a little get-together. And there was a picture of this handsome man leaning against an old, like a 1940s truck or something. And he had on a white T-shirt and a ball cap and khaki pants. And they were like, "Who's that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's my grandfather." And they're like, "He was black?" And I'm like, "What?" And then the person I was dating who was black was like, "Oh yeah, I can see where people would think that." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, you never could. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just like, "Oh, who's this handsome African-American fellow?"
That's funny that everyone sees this picture of my grandfather that's black and white, which tonal qualities, you know, obviously not that, you know, but to me, it just looked like a picture of my grandfather. But my gentleman friend I was dating was like, "Oh yeah, he marched with Dr. King," and, you know, was kind of laughing. And I was like, "That's very interesting. I would never," you know, when you know something to be one thing and then other people see it and their perspective is different, it's great. It's a great way to open your eyes.
It is.
So it's going to be, I can't wait to get my 23andMe kit back and find out that I am 100% Native American.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations. We're starting season 2.
Yeah, I don't really like how these things are laid out, but yes, it's a new year. It's a new season. We were not dormant during the break we took, Tipsters. We did take a few weeks off, but we were recording some interviews and some upcoming shows that I think are going to be interesting, and that I know are going to be interesting. And we ended the first season 1 of 2018 with 60 episodes, and we are looking to do 1,000 episodes this year.
Oh,
should I have mentioned that to you?
I do have a job.
Damn it.
But I'm listen,
Shit.
goals. Let's set the goals.
All right, like every 2 days you're doing an episode.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. We're not. We definitely are going to do the once a week, and occasionally we'll throw in a murdertizer, and we'll roll the dice and see where this shit lands, huh?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to you? So we are going to do a few things differently in season 2. One episode a month will be about a missing person or an unsolved case. I have opened my eyes. The Tip-Sters have helped to open my eyes and give me that different perspective about how my grandfather is Black, and that unsolved cases and missing persons cases are more important than anything at this point. But my love of true crime of any kind, and having a finality, having a finish line, having an answer has propelled me to do this podcast, which I love doing so very much. And I did miss the little bit of time we had off during the holidays. I missed being here and doing something that I love so much, but I also want to honor and add in stories that need resolution. And I always feel that there are so many other podcasts that cover that so expertly that no one needs my opinion. But the more voices that are heard, perhaps the more mysteries can be solved. So at least one episode a month will involve something that may be more interactive with the Tip-Sters. Maybe if you know something, if you see something, if you want to say something, we would love to hear it. And we have many ways you can reach us. We have a Facebook page. We have our number 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. We have our email address, jttipsters@gmail.com. And with that being said, if you are within the sound of my voice and enjoy the show, please feel free to rate and review on iTunes, subscribe. If you don't like the show, please know it's known as Murders Are Fucking Awful. And if you do like the show, it's known as Just the Tip-Sters. So
Tip-Sters.
Yeah, there's a dash, because I didn't want it to sound like a penis podcast, but it does, and that's fine. Penises and murder. Maybe we should have called it that.
That probably would have gotten a few extra
damn it.
hits. I don't know.
Why is it always hindsight's 2020? God damn it. Shit.
I think we're doing fine.
Okay. So just a small update. Back in early December, as we were interviewing Ted DeBias, the no body guy, we had just that day gotten news that some remains were found in the Santa Clarita area, which is where we live. And what had spurned this podcast to come into being is the missing case of William Serzon, who went missing January 26th of 2017. So we're coming up on his 2-year anniversary. He may be the episode later in the month that we cover if the remains turn out to not be him. It's been 4.5 weeks now, and we're pretty sure it's not him, but obviously there's nothing definitive. Just a little bit of me poking around, prying around, some people that are nosier than I am, poking around, prying around, talking to the lead detective in Will's case, talking to several people at the LA County Coroner's Office. Everyone's polite and kind. Whether they're just, leading me on, it's like, we'll give you information, but we won't. We don't know for sure that the remains that were found, it was a skull, a mandible, and a few additional bones. We do not know that those are Will. We don't know whose they are, potentially a homeless person. But we don't know for sure anything. So when we do know, we will absolutely let you know. So I wanted to start off season 2 with something a little different, because this case has occupied my mind. It's a solved case, but it's an interesting one at that. Occupied my mind since it happened. And some of the Tip-Sters are old enough to remember where they were when specific things happened. Maybe when they heard that John Lennon had been shot, or maybe there's even Tip-Sters who remember where they were when John Kennedy was shot. I remember a few things. I do remember hearing when John Lennon was shot, because I had friends in junior high who were just the biggest Beatle fans, and I was like, I'm really sorry the way it happened. I don't care about their music, but it was a terrible thing that happened. Obviously, no one should be killed through gun violence unless you're defending yourself against them. But this, I do not know why this one struck me so very hard. Maybe I was a bigger fan of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s than I ever wanted to admit. But I know my mother was a huge JFK Sr. fan. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mother was pregnant with me when he was just barely pregnant with me when he was murdered. And several people I know who are a little older than me remember where they were. How old were you, Producer Mark? You were probably too young, right?
I was in kindergarten.
Kindergarten, okay.
And I remember, I mean, I don't remember the details of exactly when I found, but I found out at school, and they let us all go home. And my mom remembers me running in. Of course, they already had heard, but I came running in from school because back then we could walk home from school because people let their kids walk home from school. So I ran home from school, apparently, ran in the door and I said, Mommy, President Kennedy's been shot. And, apparently I was very upset about it. But I do remember that whole weekend. The TV changed TV network, news coverage forever because the TV networks all went live and were continuously live for the next 4 days, all on the assassination.
So you were the town crier for the Humphreys family, or had your mother already known?
They knew. They knew when I came running in the house.
Oh, okay, yeah. But you weren't the first one to tell them?
No.
Okay.
They had heard it. My mom had heard it on TV.
Gotcha. Okay, but it was still obviously, even as a small child, it was still a big deal for you.
Oh, yeah.
And I've spoken to people that are older than me that say, oh, I remember exactly where I was. When I was 28, I dated... I'm a terrible person.
Uh-oh.
I dated someone who was quite a bit older than me. And he said offhandedly one day, I was just being an asshole. He said, I remember where I was when I heard that Kennedy was shot. And I turned to him in mock surprise and said, Ted Kennedy has been shot?
Oh, you are bad.
That's basically what he said.
Oh, boy.
I also said, Paul McCartney had a band before Wings? Because I'm an asshole.
You're just like to poke a little bit.
It was mostly because I enjoyed making him feel so much older than me. But yeah, that was my...
Okay.
I'm an asshole. So I do remember Saturday, July 17th. I had been practicing yoga for about 5 months. I'd started practicing yoga.
What year?
99. I was going to get to that if you'd give me a second. I'd begun practicing yoga in February of 1999. And one of the first places I found that I adored was Angel City Yoga and Studio City. And it was on Ventura Boulevard right near Laurel Canyon. And I was always, my favorite Saturday morning class was at 8:30, taught by Catherine and Richard Lincoln, a married couple, and I loved them both. And Richard actually performed our wedding ceremony. Richard was an ordained Episcopalian minister, and I loved taking that class. And I felt really lucky that morning. One of my favorite rituals was to get up on Saturday, drive to my yoga class, and then drive around in my car listening to This American Life with Ira Glass. So, because I've always been a radio person, loved it with all my heart. And the radio was much like television was taken over during the JFK assassination. Radio was taken over with updates on JFK Jr. being missing in a plane. So it was one of those mornings where you're like, I'm feeling lucky today. You pull up and there's parking right on Ventura Boulevard at a meter right in front of your yoga studio, which was like, I should have bought a lottery ticket, but was so mesmerized by the report of JFK Jr., his wife, Carolyn Bessette, his wife of under 3 years, and his sister-in-law, Lauren Bessette, who was an executive at Morgan Stanley Financial, the three of them being missing in a plane that he was piloting. And I remember to this day sitting on Ventura Boulevard on a beautiful sunny Saturday morning in July and saying silently to myself, hasn't this family been through enough? Haven't they been through enough? And, yes, they have. Yes, they had. And yet, 20 years later, almost a 20th anniversary, but 20 years later from that incident in the family, hindsight, 2020, much like we had said earlier, I'm not saying that the lives of the Kennedy clan, let's call them clan because it's a large number of people, Catholic, a lot of these things were brought on by themselves. I'm not saying you can predict that you're going to be shot by an assassin, lone gunman, or a huge conspiracy. I'm not saying that you deserve to die in a plane you pilot. But I am saying now, all these years later, and my fascination and many thousands, at least, if not millions of people's fascination with the brain, how the brain works, psychopathy, risky lifestyles, these things are all sort of solidifying for me in the dismantling of the Camelot theory. So my mom had these many books on the JFK administration and John F. Kennedy, the history of John F. Kennedy. I was a little kid, like maybe 7 or 8, when one of the books in my stocking at Christmas was John F. Kennedy and the PT-109. Apparently he was like a sub captain or something.
I wish I knew your mom. I think we would have had a real fun time. They made a movie out of it.
Yes,
starring
they did.
Cliff Robertson.
Right.
Yep. PT-109. Yep.
I could not have cared less as a child about John F. Kennedy Sr. piloting a submarine and, him being a Navy hero and having a bad back. I find out later his bad back was probably from fucking too many whores. But maybe it was an injury from the military. I don't know. It's not. I don't care.
You have a way of putting things.
I think he threw his back out fucking Marilyn Monroe. I don't know. I'm just saying, it's my theory. I can have that theory.
You got to throw your back out somehow.
See, that's what I'm saying. There are many ways one can throw one's back out. So anyway, my grandmother had a painting in the hallway between the guest room and the bathroom. And it was so... Now I think about it and it's just filled with treacle, but it was a big, heavy carved wood frame, and it was a oil painting of of John F. Kennedy Sr. and one of the popes walking along a row that had been dug in a field with their hands kind of dropping things into the ground, and it was entitled "Sowing Seeds of Peace."
I see.
Yeah. And we weren't Catholic, by the way. But,
that would have been Pope Paul, I think.
Yeah, it could have been one of them. Paul I, Paul II, Paul Part 2, Paul JP Part 2, Electric Boogaloo.
There are a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was Pope Paul VI, if I remember correctly.
Pope Paul VI, yeah. Electric Boogaloo. I don't know. So anyway, so that's, where I came from. So big supporters of the Democratic Party. That's what I grew up with. So I, thought JFK Jr. was handsome, I think, with 99% of the rest of the universe. I do remember thinking when he married Carolyn Bessette, I was too young to know, oh, he married a commoner. Well, what the fuck? He's not royalty. I mean, he may be American royalty, but I sure the hell didn't think of her as a commoner. He was a commoner. I didn't, put them on the pedestal of royalty. You could call them American royalty. If you say that, pretty much everyone's, of a certain age group is going to say, oh yeah, the Kennedys are the American royalty. All right. Okay, whatever. And as we know, with royalty, with politicians families, we're all human. We're all human beings and we all make mistakes. So I do remember my mom giving a lot of leeway to JFK Jr. not passing the bar the first one or perhaps 2 times. So we kind of understand that JFK Jr. didn't have his dad's brain. He had his mom and dad's and everyone else's good looks, faux show. And on, inspection backward, I am going to say this, and you can agree or disagree, and I don't care, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. I believe he was probably a psychopath and definitely a narcissist. And those things don't necessarily have to be bad things. I've said before, and I mean it until someone proves differently. A psychopath is a double-edged sword. I think most of the captains of industry are psychopaths. They're also the people that get shit done. Not all psychopaths are going to eat your face off and bury you in a well under their house. They're going to climb to the top of industry. They're going to try to make changes for better or worse, mostly probably benefiting themselves. But in the meantime, also pushing, us forward. And I do believe he was a psychopath. He had a risky lifestyle in that he loved to take chances. He, broke bones. He liked to do things that other people wouldn't, I recently took a Facebook quiz that a friend sent one night when I wasn't sleeping as usual. And one of the questions was, would you bungee jump? And she answered no. And I'm like, well, yeah. But he did way more than that. He would he wanted to rappel Mount Rushmore. Now, thankfully, he was denied that, but he did put in a request to rappel down the faces of the president.
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, it's just, he was a very interesting man. Now, I began to get more respect for him, honestly, when he developed the magazine George. Because, he became an attorney and he worked for a law firm. I think it was probably, as a favor to his family. I don't know how much he loved that, how much he wanted to do that, but he wanted to do a lot of things the way a lot of ambitious, motivated psychopaths do. And he did. And I remember, probably shallowly, but I do remember Cindy Crawford on the cover of George in a powdered wig as George Washington. Apparently he took a lot of heat when Barbara Streisand was on the cover of George magazine as Betsy Ross, sewing together a flag. He kind of tongue-in-cheek made fun of his dad by having Drew Barrymore dressed as Marilyn Monroe on the cover of...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I thought George magazine was, maybe because I'm not as, definitely not as much of a dialed-in political animal as producer Mark. And I was definitely not as much of a dialed-in political animal as my mom, who gave me John Dean's Blind Ambition for my 12th birthday or something. I was fascinated by politics, but basically not as much of a deep dive as the people in my life that I respect who know much more about politics, like my husband / producer Mark and my exquisite mother, rest in peace, Betty Morgan. So I liked JFK Jr. for, normal reasons. I was in my 20s and he was a handsome dude in his 30s. And I loved George magazine. I had a subscription and I thought it was interesting. It was, it wasn't Vanity Fair, but it also wasn't the National Enquirer. It was somewhere in the middle. And it had, political articles and pop culture articles. It was, it wasn't all dry politics. It wasn't Weekly Review. And it wasn't all, guess who's fucking who in Hollywood. It was really somewhere in the middle. But the political articles, I felt, gave me an understanding and a basis for things. And I've always understood that, even as a younger person, that magazines, even back then, back in the old days when they were printed by hand by Ben Franklin when I was a child, they didn't have a lot of opportunity to make money. And it was a hard job putting out, a lot of content on a monthly basis. And you had to get pretty far ahead and you had to plan a year, sometimes more ahead. So I thought it was pretty fucking fantastic that he kind of did something different. So it was put out by, Hachette Publications. And after a couple of years, they were kind of like, yeah, it's not fish or fowl. It's not a huge hit and it's not, shitty, but I don't know that we're going to continue a contract. So 3 days before the plane crash, he had met with the head of Condé Nast in Canada and looking for investors to help keep the magazine going. And they were interested and they were going to have another meeting, but JFK Jr. died before they could have the second meeting. One of the last things he did on Friday before the fated flight was to let the executives at Hachette know, look, I've had this conversation with people at Condé Nast and they're willing to be investors. So that was like sort of an upbeat note. One of the last things he did before he left to get in his plane. So he had an accident 6 weeks before on a really bad crash of a paraglider and broken his ankle. Now, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak with a pilot, and I'm not sure why he's comfortable with me not using his name, but perhaps he's running from the law. But he is also a very stand-up man with morals and scruples, so I'm not sure what he'd be running from. But anyway, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak with him about some of the technical things that could happen in a plane and also some of the moral issues that a pilot has. So one of the reasons that I, on hindsight, think JFK Jr. was a psychopath was his lifestyle. He was diagnosed with ADD. That does not make you a psychopath. It makes you easily distractible. He had, he would take big chances, really big chances. He frightened all of his friends. He would get in a kayak, right off of, in New York and get into the New York harbor, and they would be like, please stop it. And he would go, paddle out of sight, and they would fret more. And these are grown men who were worried about him. He loved rappelling. That's one of the reasons he wanted to rappel down Mount Rushmore. He had, he went to flight school. Jackie was like, please do not do this. Please do not do this. She actually had a premonition that he would perish in a plane crash and told him she didn't want him to get his license.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And she said to him privately what I said the morning that I heard of his death. Hasn't this family had enough tragedy? She begged him not to get his license. And you might find this interesting. Producer Mark, the risk manager and head of VP, Vice President of Litigation and Risk Management, there was a Kennedy, family trust who handled all their insurance. And JFK Jr. had his license and insurance handled by the trust so that his mother didn't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Had asked them to please insure my plane and help me get my license, and we will not let my mom know because she didn't want me to do it. And he's, 38 years old. Well, at the time, I guess he was 36.
Wow.
I know.
Well, all this risk-taking, I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, I didn't either. You look at him and he's like this, only thing I remember, and this also sort of lends itself to the psychopathy. Every picture I remember, he had his shirt off. And I get it. If you have a body like that, I probably wouldn't wear clothes either.
Yeah.
He had an exquisite body, the six-pack abs, and just a beautiful form of a man. And he, a lot of times, was shirtless. And that lends itself to, look, I'm here, take a look.
Yeah.
It's, part of the psychopathy. Not everyone who's handsome and well-built goes without clothing.
I didn't know much about him, really. I knew about George Magazine, but the only real thing I remember about him before the plane crash was the episode of Seinfeld that, the Master of Your Domain episode. Oh. That's how Elaine Lost was watching him on TV.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
So that's all I really knew about him.
Yeah, he's kind of a hottie. And he dated so many more people, famous people, than I even remembered. It was a very big deal when he dated Daryl Hannah. There were pictures of him with Sarah Jessica Parker. He was obviously a ladies' man, and that's not hard to imagine. He was, I don't want to demean the dead, but, he's handsome and affable and charismatic. He had everything a successful psychopath would have except for the brain. He wasn't a brilliant guy. He was a guy who would figure things out simply, and he was, I think, a very good, he had a very honed ability to read people. He could read the room I feel like he could walk in and read the room. So his partner in George magazine said that when he would call people and say, hey, could we, famous people, can we get you to be on the cover? And they would say no. His partner would say, okay, now what can we do to get them to do it? What can we do to convince them? And JFK Jr. would say, you know what? Learn to back off. If they say no, say, you know what? Thank you so much for considering it. Maybe next time. And then maybe the next time you ask, they'll say yes. So even to this day, his partner in George magazine, this is almost a little too awful to say out loud, but I'm going to say it, says to himself, WWJD, and not what would Jesus do? What would John do? And not because JFK Jr. was, Buddha, but because he had a way of tapping into patience. And he actually said sometimes laying back and patience will win. And that's a really good sign, and maybe why he wasn't a psychopath that was destructive. The only person he was destructive to was himself, and then, as we find out later, his wife and sister-in-law. But so it's a very layered story. Apparently, it's a big article that's scathing and probably true. But Maureen Callahan with the New York Times seemed like she ain't a real big fan of the Kennedys. So it's pretty harsh, this article that came out just recently in the New York Times. And there was under the ABC News banner, a 2-hour special on the tragic death of JFK Jr. And it is tragic. And it's tragic that 2 other people died with him. And it's tragic everything that went into it. And it is layered like baklava, is it layered? So we know that JFK Jr. had his pilot's license, but it wasn't a very full, experienced license. He'd had 6 weeks earlier the crash with the paraglider, which the plane he was flying at the time of his death. He had 2 planes. The first plane he flew was a more simple plane, a Cessna Skylane 182, and he did that, a more basic plane, let's call it that. And he did that beautifully. He flew that beautifully. And he had just gotten a more advanced Saratoga plane at the time, 1998, I think he bought it, or early 99. It was $300,000. So it was a pricey plane, and it also had bigger instrumentation, and you needed to be more skilled to fly it. And here's where the psychopath part comes in. He probably thought, yeah, I can do this. And that's part of the same guy who had a paragliding accident and broke his ankle. And I was told by the pilot I spoke to that the single engine plane that he was flying is like a paraglider with a motor. So if you have that bravado, if you have that psychopathy, you probably think, yeah, I can do this. I did it once. Oh, okay, I broke my ankle. But, no, it's fine. I can do it. So he had, 310 hours, flight hours. 55 hours were at night. However, most of that was on his original basic plane. He had under 10 hours of flying at night on his new plane. So that's kind of a big deal. But even number of hours, and even I asked the pilot his opinion. So the broken ankle, he had his cast removed that day. He'd gone to Lenox Hill Hospital in New York, had the cast removed from the ankle that afternoon. And the doctor said, please don't fly. It's your ankle's not completely healed. He'd had surgery. He had surgery on a broken ankle 6 weeks before. And granted, he is Superman and he is 38 years old. That's not 28 and it's not 68. You might heal a little slower than when you're 28. You might heal much faster than when you're 68. But, he's a 38-year-old, really in good shape, healthy man. But the doctor said don't fly for at least 10 days. And he flew a couple of hours later. So there's a rudder pedal. use, and I'm not going to use a lot of technical terms in flying because I'm not sure how many people, first of all, there's like 7 people that listen to this fucking podcast. I doubt 7 of them are pilots, but the people that are pilots that hear this, if I make a mistake, I try very hard to not, and I do an extensive amount of research. So if I use an incorrect term, please feel free to write in, call in, and tell me what a fuck up I am, but just know I'm trying the best that I can. So there are rudder pedals that can be used. And it was one of his flight instructors said that he needed a little more time or help with that. Now, the broken ankle part, I asked the pilot, would that have compromised his use of the rudder pedals? And he said, I wouldn't necessarily count that as an issue. When a tragedy happens, when a big accident happens, everyone dissects it and tries to figure out why it happened. Of course we do. That's human nature. You want to know why it happened. But his inability to fly using the injured ankle, his not that many flight hours on his new plane, those could have been contributing factors, but wouldn't necessarily have been a precursor of a huge tragedy like this. What was probably the biggest problem was the weather and the inability to respect it. So another pilot, fellow pilot, canceled his flight that night. And this was a short flight, 200 miles, flight miles. He was taking his sister-in-law to Martha's Vineyard to drop her off to be with friends and family. And then he and Carolyn, his wife, were heading over to Hyannisport for the wedding of his cousin, Rory Kennedy, on Saturday. And it seems like everything went a little wrong all along the way. JFK Jr. was late leaving the office and getting to the airport. Lauren Bessette was driven to the airport by her husband. It was a Friday night. It should have been a 40-minute drive, and she got there in 120 minutes. So it was a big backlog of traffic. And the last person, they were supposed to leave before dark. The last person to arrive was Carolyn Bessette, and this is just a terrible thing I'm going to say, and I am not victim shaming. I am not victim shaming, but it was one of the things that contributed. She had purchased a new dress for the wedding and had taken a small inside piece of the hem to a salon and asked that her toenails be painted to match the dress. And she wasn't, according to those who were there, she was not condescending or crabby or demanding, but the manicurist painted her pedicure once. She went over to the window with the swatch and it didn't match. She came back. The manicurist painted her toenails twice. She took it back to the window to the sunlight to see. Didn't match. And the third time, the toenail polish was the color she approved, and she was the last one to get to the airport at 8:20. Now, he didn't file a flight plan, which he didn't have to. He just filed a takeoff plan, not an entire flight plan, and could have been because he ended up sort of changing directions, taking a shorter route, which may have been the cause of the problem. Instead of following the shoreline where there were lights, he wanted to take about a 30-minute, probably in an effort to cut the time that they had, the time that had made them late. So everyone was late to the airport. They finally got going, and it was supposed to be a pretty simple, easy flight. He had done it, by the way, 35 times previously. He had done the same exact flight 35 previous times, which could also lend someone an extra ounce of bravado. I can do this. It doesn't matter the conditions. I know me. I know my abilities. I can do it. Kind of a psychopathic way of doing things. And sometimes it works out. I mean, sometimes psychopaths can, and most often they do. And let's hope that they mostly use their powers for good. We can always hope that, right? It just doesn't always work out that way. And then someone ends up making a suit out of a woman's skin. But there are also those who, run first world countries. I'm not naming any names. So at 8:49, it's about 10 minutes after his departure, and until 8:54, he flew in the same vicinity as an American Airlines flight, and it was on approach to Westchester County Airport. And a traffic collision avoidance system, said, hey, there's another flight out there. There was no connection. It turns out that close call, contributed in any way to this. But his departure time was supposed to be like 6 o'clock, and they didn't really depart until 8:39. And he did not request any help. He ended up flying over featureless open water, which is part of the problem. And from my discussion with the pilot, the haze, which in July, I'm thinking, why would there be so much haze? But hey, what do I know about, the East Coast in July? Not a lot. So the haze was apparently the biggest factor that could cause the problem. It could cause, a depth perception problem and what they call spatial orientation. And what it sounds like from all the reports is that he mistook the ground for the sky and plummeted quickly. Now, from what the pilot said, that a spiral like that can be extraordinarily difficult to get out of. This pilot has seen a small single-engine plane hit the ground. He said it actually hit a school not far from where he was working in a shop. And they heard the plane overhead, which by then was obviously very close to the ground. So a spiral is difficult to get out of. Now, a pop culture reference that has meant very much to me is the 2012 film Flight with Denzel Washington. Now, what meant a lot to me in that film was the fact that he was an addict and had a psychopathic behavior and bravado, and believed he could fly impaired, and then he flew better. I actually know a few people who drink heavily. One of them was a previous employer who spent a lot of time on his boat on the Ohio River when I worked in Cincinnati. And he used to say to me, I pilot the boat much better when I'm drunk. When I'm sober, I end up hitting things. And I'm like, okay, whatever you need to do to justify to yourself your drinking problem. This is a man whose last name began with an S, and his nickname was Suds.
That's awesome.
That's telling. Yeah, it's like if your nickname is Jim Beam. So yeah, his nickname was Suds, and Suds would say he would leave early on Fridays, and he had the W.C. Fields gin blossom nose, all the broken blood vessels in his nose and cheeks because of his large consumption of alcohol. So he would leave early on Fridays and come back not in great shape Monday morning, and spend most of the summer months. It's not like you can be on the Ohio River, all year long, but quite a bit, spring, summer, fall. And he would come back on Monday not in great shape, and had been basically drunk on the river, piloting a boat. And I don't mean like a giant yacht, but a pretty, a good sized boat enough that, and it's not like the Ohio River is so wide that you can avoid, barges that go up and down, our country. Anyway, that's just part, I'm not diagnosing every single human being in my life as a psychopath. I've just known a few, let's call them advanced risk takers. I've known a few of those in my life. And on reflection in the past, yeah, that was pretty stupid. So JFK Jr., is like, I can get us out of this. I do remember a detail that I don't know why it brought me peace, because it probably shouldn't have. I thought, oh my gosh, the plane broke up in the water and they're going to be God knows where. And they were all 3 found it did break up, and it was very much right off the tip of Martha's Vineyard. He almost made it. It was in 116 feet of water. The parts of the plane were scattered about 120 feet around. JFK Jr. was still strapped into the pilot seat, and Carolyn and Lauren were still strapped into their seats, but they were sort of pinned under the fuselage. So the plane broke up somewhat, but they were all still sort of trapped in, still strapped in. And when I asked the pilot his opinion, what would have been the cause of death in a spiral like this? Would it have been, lack of oxygen and they pass out and die? And he said blunt force trauma. So, and the blunt force trauma happened because all the reports are delicately saying they all died on impact. They died on impact. And I'm like, well, what does that exactly mean? They're also not saying that, until later, 20 years later now, that the bodies were extremely mangled. I just had this image of them all being in perfect form, strapped into their seats, and maybe they drowned. That's exactly what I thought, is they all drowned. They couldn't get out. They were passed out and they drowned eventually. No, the cause of death was blunt force trauma. And the pilot explained to me probably because of the straps. So being strapped in, probably during such a forceful, took about 30 seconds from the records, the flight records and radio reports, and I guess from the black box. It took about 30 seconds of a spin, dropping quickly and then hitting the water. And they were probably very, quickly expired, with the seatbelts probably crushing their ribcage and them dying quickly. So that's the only thing that brought me peace now. At the time, I thought, I hope they didn't suffer. I hope that they didn't drown. I couldn't imagine anything worse than trying to extricate myself from something I'm strapped into, something that's supposed to save me, and maybe did save me from a worse death, being strapped in. Drowning would be just, I think, struggling to breathe would just be such an awful way to go. So this orientation when you're flying, it can easily happen. It can happen to very experienced pilots. It probably mostly happens to those that have as much experience as JFK Jr. did, which is not a lot. There was one sort of final mistake that he made, which was he had incorrect radio frequencies registered. He had accidentally registered the Martha's Vineyard radio frequency as 127.25, and it's 126.25. So he was just off somewhat. The NTSB is not going to comment on whether that was a contributing factor, because there's really no record of him, mayday or asking for help. So jumping back again to the film Flight, such a fantastic performance by Denzel Washington. Such a fantastic performance. So he is an alcoholic who was drunk before a flight, and then in an effort to rouse himself before a flight, a commercial flight, he would snort cocaine. So he had his downer and his upper. And he looked at the cocaine as, that's just how you get out of your hangover. He didn't really care about the cocaine. He cared about the alcohol. But he found a way to survive and make it work. So one of the things that struck me so much about that film, and it hits home for different things for different people. Several people I know that are addicts are so taken with his portrayal of an addict and what happens to him as he pilots a plane. There are 102 souls on board, and 96 of them survive. 2 crew members are lost and 4 passengers. One of the flight attendants, who it's sort of suggested was partying with Denzel Washington's pilot's character the night before, notifies him that there are 102 souls on board, that he's responsible for 102 souls. And I'd often wondered why they used that term in aviation, especially commercial aviation. And we'll explain that later. But the audio that was eventually released of this flight is very fascinating. I remember in my mind hearing it in 1999, but they're saying it wasn't released until 2008. But I remember hearing on the radio the morning after, because this young man sounded so confused. And I felt bad for him, and I thought, why is he representing this airport? So at the Martha's Vineyard Airport, which was the first airport that he was supposed to land in to drop off his sister-in-law, Lauren, after the flight was supposed to land at 10:05, there was a call. Hey, has anyone heard from this plane? Do you have a flight plan? And this, at the time, 21-year-old intern, Adam Budd, from the Martha's Vineyard Airport, called the automated flight service station in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And he's quietly asking if the FAA can track a missing aircraft. And the FAA worker's like, well, who are you? And Adam Budd says, well, I'm with airport operations. And he didn't identify which airport, but we know it's the Martha's Vineyard Airport. And he's like, well, why are you seeking information on a missing Saratoga plane? And this 21-year-old kid says, well, actually, Kennedy Jr.'s on board, and they want to know where he is. So he's this 21-year-old kid who in the middle of the night is typically doing clerical work at the tower. And he's getting a call, find John F. Kennedy Jr., his plane's down, fucking figure it out. And this poor kid, calls the automated flight service station. Can you track a flight for me? I don't know. And then he finally is like, if it's too much trouble, I'll just tell them they have to wait. But, it really couldn't wait because they were missing. I do remember at the time President Bill Clinton getting into some hot water when he sent military planes and ships to look for what's essentially private citizens. As you can tell, someone with the pedigree of John F. Kennedy Jr. is going to probably get more attention than 3 private citizens who have a plane. But, this was still part of our American royalty. And I'm really glad we don't have royalty in America anymore. But if there was American royalty, John F. Kennedy Jr. would be that. I think he was probably given a lot of leeway because I don't know many people in any country who are not familiar with the picture of little John under his dad's desk in the Oval Office, little head peeping out from under his dad's desk, and the picture of him saluting his father's casket. Those pictures are emblazoned in most people's minds. And you give someone who's been through that, it doesn't matter who their dad is, but their dad was the leader of the free world, let's just say, you give them a wide berth. And when they go missing with their wife and sister-in-law, you probably use everything you can to find them. And it's part of the system that's broken, that all of us should have that sort of, if any of us go missing, we should all have someone who cares enough, the rest of the humanity, to look for us so stringently and deeply and worried about where we are and our safety and our health. But it doesn't always work out that way. But, when you're part of the American royalty, I guess I didn't really think at the time about Bill Clinton using tax dollars and the military to find JFK Jr. I didn't really think of it as being a bad thing, but, I don't know if it would happen today. I bet it would. I mean, it definitely would. Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of a party. I don't think it's a Democrat or a Republican or a Green Party issue. I'm hoping it's a human issue. And he, used by he, President Clinton, used a Navy destroyer that ended up finding the remains. And the bodies were taken to Duxbury, Massachusetts. They were cremated at the Mayflower Cemetery crematorium, and their ashes, because John F. Kennedy Jr. wanted to be scattered at sea, he and Carolyn their ashes were scattered at sea. And speaking with the pilot and finding out the reason for using the word soul. So technically, passengers on a commercial flight are the number of seats that are occupied. The crew and the pilots and the flight attendants, that's the crew. So they're usually not confused with the bodies of the regular passengers. So what you say, and what was said beautifully in the film Flight, was you are responsible for 102 souls on board. And that's the number of living humans on board. So even if you are carrying a deceased person, a military person, they're considered cargo because they're not a living human being. They may still have a soul, but hopefully it has gone to some other plane, whatever they believed in. And by plane, I mean like ethereal plane, not flying plane. So why I think JFK Jr. was a bit of a psychopath is that I don't know that he took into consideration that he was responsible for 3 souls. I think he felt he was responsible for his own and didn't take that responsibility as seriously as he should. You know, he lived a risky lifestyle, but he was responsible for 2 other souls, and he failed his mission. So speaking with the pilot, who is a very a man who can explain things in a wonderful way, like a teacher, explained all the things. You check the balance and the weight and the mechanics, obviously. And the last thing you check is your viability as a pilot. This pilot takes very seriously the responsibility of anyone on board a flight that he is piloting. He said the last thing you check is yourself as the pilot. You know, you haven't been drinking, you haven't been doing drugs, you haven't even been taking cold medicine with codeine. And I thought, wow, that is a big responsibility. And I'm always grateful when I take a commercial flight. I always, as I leave, thank the crew and the pilots for getting us there safely. Even if it's just a verbal thank you, I hope it gives them something. They're probably not paid what they should be paid. It's a huge responsibility. If you have hundreds of souls you're responsible for, including your own, if you take risks and, you know, break your own ankle and do things that aren't, you know, really safe, you're responsible for your soul. And if you fuck up, you fuck up. But when you have a responsibility like that, when you have the responsibility of other souls and your own, it's an important distinction, and you would hope a pilot would take it seriously. So speaking to the pilot I was enlightened and buoyed by his level of concern for the souls. I am sad about what happened to JFK Jr. and Carolyn and Lauren. I'm sad that we had to see behind the curtains of Camelot and our American royalty. But I'm more sad that someone with such passion, interesting brain wiring, ambition, ability, didn't take his responsibility a little more seriously for his soul, his wife's soul, and his sister-in-law's soul. So I hope that you tipsters take all the responsibility you can carry to keep your soul here as long as it can be. And more cowbell.
And if you've got thoughts on the JFK Jr. plane crash or any tip at all, give us a call at 832-TIPSTER, 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com.